Rubio has been raising alarm over the state of Florida's election irregularities for quite some time, and he joins us tonight on set. Senator, thanks very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So I know you're a senator who represents the state of Florida, and you're pro-Florida. But as objectively as you can, what is the core problem with elections in Florida?
Well, actually, there isn't. I mean, 65 of 67 counties did it right. You know, Miami-Dade County is right on the border with Broward. 60% voted for Democrats in the Senate race and the governor's race. They got all their votes in on time, and then they did their recount on time. It is largely focused on two counties, and one in particular, Broward County, where you have an inept and incompetent elections director who's done this in the past.
Yes.
And so when someone, you know, a perfect example is these provisional ballots, right? It's people that show up and vote. You don't show up in the system. They let you vote, but they put your vote in an envelope, and then they make sure they verify you. She decided to take 205 of them and count them on her own without submitting them the right way to this provisional, to the canvassing board. When that was discovered, she said, all right, I'll give it to the canvassing board. But she had already separated the ballots from the envelopes. They found 20 of them to be invalid. But then there's no way to match the ballots to the envelope when you separate them. So then she submitted 205 votes to the state out of that batch. 20 of them, at least 20 of them, are invalid votes. Now she claims that they're not part of the count, which contradicts what her lawyer said a few days ago. So when someone that incompetent is sitting on thousands of ballots, we don't know how many they are, she's not regularly reporting them, of course we're going to be concerned about that. And of course we're going to be concerned about the reporting. And the second state of play is it's now lawyer time. Lawyers are arguing to the state, that to the judge, they're trying to get a federal judge to do two things. One, throw out state law when it comes to voter intent. They're going to do a manual recount in the Senate race of all the ballots that either didn't vote in the Senate race or double voted. And there's a very specific law for what voter intent is. You know, if you circle Rick Scott or Bill Nelson, that's fine, but you had to have done it throughout the ballot. Right. The machine won't read it. They want to throw out that standard and just let it be, I don't know what.
Can you change the standard after the vote is
That's my concern. I mean, look, if you say there's a problem with the law, that's what the legislature's there for. But to have a judge come in and announce that Florida law, after the election, we're going to change the rules in hopes of influencing the outcome, that to me is stealing the election. And then they also want to force them to count every mail ballot, even the ones in which the signature didn't match the signature on file for the voter. These are the two fundamental arguments before federal court.
Just to stop you, is that the requirement that the signature has to match?
Yeah,
so if that's the existing requirement, how can they argue it's no longer the requirement?
Because they're saying it's an arbitrary standard, and who's making the decision?
But that was a standard on Election Day, right?
Correct. And I think that's what I'm hoping a reasonable judge, no matter how activist it might be, would argue, that's a good point. You should have raised it before the election, and that's something for the legislature to fix. But we're not going to change the rules of the election after the election to influence the outcome, because if you do it, it's stealing an election.
Amazing. So I want to ask you about the question of nationalism. The president described himself as a nationalist recently. He was attacked by the leader of France for doing that. You recently published a Wall Street Journal op-ed defending the idea of nationalism.
Yeah.
Why is nationalism a necessary concept in modern America?
Well, American nationalism.
Of course.
What is our identity? Our identity is not a common race, ethnicity.
Right.
In fact, America is a de facto rejection of that. It is fundamentally premised on this notion. We are all children of God. We are born with God. We are all created equal by our Creator, and we are given equal rights to life, liberty, and to pursue happiness. That is our national identity. It is deeply rooted in morals and in values. It, in fact, explains everything this nation has done internationally and domestically. We should be proud of that identity. We should defend that national identity. Number two, I think most of the viewers watching this program would be shocked to think that my job is to represent Belgium, or my job is to represent, I have nothing against Belgium. I always pick on Belgium or Luxembourg. They have their own system of government. That doesn't mean I need to be hostile towards them. Right. And it may be in our national interest to work with them. I think NATO was in our national interest and is. I think a lot of our alliances are built on that. And in fact, our national identity as a nation that believes in the equality of all people is what has caused us to defend democracy and feed hungry people all over the world. We should be proud of that. But as a government leader, my fundamental obligation, first and foremost, is to work on behalf of the American people. And most of the time, if not all the time, we can do that without hurting other people around the world.
It's hard to know what the argument against what you just said might be. Why would people object? No, sincerely, because it's important to understand what the objections are. What do you think they could be?
Well, there are two. One is they ascribe to nationalism, sort of the nationalism of the Nazis or somebody else. That's ethnic and racial nationalism. I'm not talking about ethnic nationalism.
Of course not.
I'm talking about a national identity that actually is completely irrelevant to your ethnicity. In fact, you don't even have to be born here. If you come here legally, you can be a U.S. citizen. It's one of the great things about America. Some of the people who love America are the most are the people who are Americans by choice.
Yes.
Because they know what life is like in another country. Then there's another school of thought that, no, we are citizens of the international community, and we have obligations to the rest of the world, which I would agree within the confines of our national interest. In fact, I've always argued that the best thing for the world is a strong and prosperous America, because our values infuse our decision-making and so much of what we do. So there are people that actually, I think that's what Macron was arguing, and that is that France's obligations, under him anyways, are not just to the French people, but to the sort of amorphous international community, which I'm not against. I've defended international organizations so long as they are in the national interest of the United States.
Because that's the country you represent.
Yeah, I mean, I swore an allegiance to the oath. I swore an oath to the Constitution of the United States. I work for the American people, and I believe I can do so while still being strong allies of Japan, strong allies of Great Britain, strong allies of our countries around, all these countries around the world, especially when our interests intersect.
I think this is a vital conversation, and I'm glad that we're having it, and I'm glad you're articulating it so clearly. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you for having me.